Week 5 is here. Friday afternoon is when I'm recording this podcast. Tonight we have Florida State and Virginia playing. The line on that game is less than a touchdown. We also have TCU at Arizona State. Big weekend of college football ahead. Dare I say we have another moving weekend? I know a couple weeks ago I said this is kind of like a baby moving weekend type of thing where by the end of Saturday, early Sunday, we look back and we're like, man, a lot of things I thought, the standings, the structure, the tier rankings of teams, a lot of who I thought was good, maybe not so good, and a lot of who I thought maybe not so good, maybe pretty good. A lot of opinions can change this weekend, but we are in for a big one. There's games in every window that any other weekend could be the headliner, and they're just stacked on top of each other. All the TVs are going to be on full display this weekend. But let's get into this. Let's start with Alabama at Georgia, the primetime game on ABC. I think it's a 6:30 kick. Should be right. Obviously, last year, Georgia goes to Bama. It's where we have that iconic Ryan Williams catch and run for the touchdown. Crazy game. It was Kalen DeBoer's first year at Alabama. Just crazy good game. Classic, one for the ages. Georgia gets down big, comes back to take the lead, and then loses late. Obviously, if you watched, you remember. But this game this year, obviously, another massive one for both teams if they want to satisfy their conference title ambitions. I'm not sure that this won't be a brutally ugly football game. I think I took the over on this. I've been kind of up and down. Last year, obviously, I think the over hit. That was a pretty high scoring game. This year, I'm kind of back and forth on it being a high scoring or just being an ugly game. But obviously, if it's anything like last year, win for another crazy one. But I'm going to say that I think this is going to be kind of an ugly football game. The dynamics are different. The scene is different. The game is at Georgia. They're trying to use, I would think they're going to try and use home field to play their style of ball, control the game, ball control football. And, obviously Bama's going to have a say on how that goes. But I think that Georgia wants to slow it down, keep things in front of them. There's some questions about the secondary after that Tennessee game. Not a whole lot of questions about Gunnar Stockton right now or their receivers, although I would like to see them. There's some other transfer receivers in there that haven't really had a lot of opportunity yet. But I think that Alabama, the big question for me about them is obviously the competitiveness of that team, because that was the big talking point after Florida State around Alabama was, wow, they lost that game not because they weren't talented enough. They lost that game not because of, play calling or not because, the ball didn't bounce their way. They lost that game because they didn't play as hard as they should have, because they didn't play as hard as they could have. That's why Alabama lost to Florida State. So I would expect Bama's full effort to be displayed in this game. They've since beaten, UL Monroe, Wisconsin. Fine, great, you handled your business, but this is the next test for Alabama. Florida State was going to be a test, but everyone kind of expected them to pass it. They didn't. This is the next test. This is the next game that we're going to see Alabama in, that we're going to, by the time the dust settles, we're going to look at them and we're going to have a new form of judgment, to put down onto Alabama about what we think of them. Same thing kind of with Georgia. A lot of people, even though they won Tennessee, I think it's pretty common to come away with, just the way that game played out at the end and thinking, man, Georgia really escaped out of there. They stole a W from the Volunteers and they escaped out of Tennessee, and they kind of did. But don't count out Kirby Smart. Don't count out the level of play that he can get his team to play up to, or, not necessarily, not that he's playing up to anyone, but don't count on his ability to get that team up for a game to play, especially off a bye week. A lot of times a bye week can be, not so good. Maybe you come out flat. Kirby Smart, Georgia, I think they're going to come out hot out of a bye week. Elephant in the room, though, all goes back to Alabama's competitiveness. It wasn't that long ago, like I said, that the whole world was questioning that. So, point spread. This is bounced between 2.5, 3, lean Georgia. I think Georgia's going to win. I just trust Kirby Smart will be able to play his style of ball at home at night in a blackout, by the way, especially whenever we still have questions about Bama's competitiveness And I think it's as simple as that. I think Georgia's going to win this game. I don't think it's going to be. I think it's going to be fairly convincing. I think Alabama will have a valiant, a good effort, but I just think Georgia's going to come out on top. I think that, Bama fans, Alabama's going to drop to 2 losses before the end of September. I'd like to know the last time that happened. Obviously, new coaches, but yep, that's pretty much it. There is another team in the state or from the state of Alabama that's going to be playing a high-profile game this weekend. Auburn, they travel to College Station to face Texas A&M. I believe this is the 2:30 game. This is a massive game and both a concerning game for both teams, especially because Auburn already has a conference loss. If you rack up another one, it's going to be very hard to get where you want to go to satisfy any SEC title ambitions, obviously. Texas A&M, this is the first game that they'll have that is a conference game. Obviously, they were coming off a bye. Prior to that, one on the road at Notre Dame. Now, with Auburn, coming off the difficult loss with no love lost for the refs against Oklahoma, how does Auburn respond? It's not a unique question. It's the common question of the week around this game. How does Auburn respond coming off of that emotional loss against Oklahoma where they feel like they got cheated? We haven't heard the end of it all week. It's just constant talk about how bad the refs are. The AD's releasing statements as late as yesterday on Thursday when you have a top 10 matchup on the road and you're still worried about last week's game. It's whatever. I am going to give them the benefit of the doubt and expect that they answer the call and that they will be better this week than they were last week because of the way that they feel like they got cheated. The question is, will it be enough to win? I don't know. The biggest problem I see for Auburn is this is the 5th consecutive game that they'll play. This is the second leg of a back-to-back road stretch. They do have a bye, but they play Georgia next. So after this game, they do get a bye, but they do, Georgia, I don't know how much look-ahead factor you have whenever there's a bye week that separates it, but it's hard to look at that schedule and not see that G on the schedule coming up. So you're also getting a rested and confident A&M team. Now, A&M is a team that I've seen in the past, and obviously new players, new coaching staff, like new culture at A&M. I get it. This is a team that I have consistently seen in the past come out of a bye week just flat. Absolutely flat. Everyone says, oh, you got a bye week, you should be rested. And while that logic tracks, I've seen them come out flat countless times. They're not the only team that does that, but I've seen them come out flat a lot. So everyone's expecting them to come out rested and confident, which that's sort of my expectation. But I think that we should at least mention that coming out flat is a legitimate possibility and to not be so surprised if it happens. But same way I'm giving benefit of the doubt for Auburn that they're not going to, have a hangover from that game last week. I'm going to give benefit of the doubt to A&M that they're not going to come out of the bye week flat. Now, I still have questions about A&M. I thought they'd be answered against Notre Dame. They really weren't so much, to the degree that I would have expected them to be, I guess I'll say. What is this defense and what is the strength of the defense? And that's a question I have. Are they just kind of average all around? Where is the run game? They haven't ran the ball to what, to the extent that I would have expected preseason. And what is Marcel Reed's ceiling of efficiency as far as throwing the ball? Now, completion percentage can be a little misleading because it obviously doesn't take into account situational aspects of the game. But his is, I think it's 58%, so it's sub 60%, not great. Watching him, yeah, there's obviously, for example, there's, a deep ball that you throw that you just missed by, by an inch. Or there's, the play breaks down, you scramble, you throw it away. That's going to count against you. That's not, that's all baked into that completion percentage, which is why I said it's not an exact indicator. But, it is, whenever you get down into the 50s, you do have some concerns. So what is his level of efficiency throwing the ball? So A&M, however, they're not terrible against the run. That's kind of been the talking point, the narrative around them. They held Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price to 4.5 per carry, which isn't great, but whenever you consider that they may be the best duo of running backs in the country, I think you should take that into, consideration whenever you look at that number. I think maybe it makes it a little better. They did hold them overall to 120 on the ground, I think. So those two backs hold, with that offensive line, and you hold them to that on the ground, it's okay. I guess I'll say it could have been worse, but not super great. You still see some busted coverages on the backside. So can Jackson Arnold take advantage of that? Maybe we've seen him hit some balls. Last week we saw him miss some. The run game hasn't been terrible, but it's just been more pass first, I think. And part of that may just have been the way that, the Notre Dame game, kind of the way that game played out, that it kind of dictated that they pass more. So that's possible too. I think that is kind of the case. So we're still early enough into the season to where a lot of teams, we don't fully know what they're going to be or who they are yet, obviously, but we have a lot of results, or not a lot of, but we have a good chunk of results, and we're just not quite sure what to make of it yet. And so like A&M's run game is an example of that. Obviously, Reed can run and throw. Can he be more efficient? Like I said, throwing. If he can be 10% more efficient, hit one or two more of those deep balls, hit one or two more of those balls across the middle for a first down whenever you need it, I think that this should be a comfortable A&M win. But I have seen a lot, from the defense. Like I said, I think that there's enough seeds of doubt in my mind about the A&M defense, and there is kind of an erratic enough form of offense that's been played by Auburn, erratic in kind of a good way, that I just feel like Auburn's going to win this game. And I think it's going to be because A&M just isn't able to contain them. And I don't necessarily mean that Auburn's going to just run it down your throat in the traditional sense and you can't stop them. But, the amount of times that the play breaks down and Jackson Arnold's out there running and burning in teams and gaining first downs, it's just kind of a constant thing. I think that combined with Cobb and Cam Coleman, I think that it's just kind of an erratic enough approach that they're going to take to somewhat of a disorganized defense of approach, and I think that just does not favor you. And so I think that maybe A&M just has some terminal flaws in that respect on defense, and Auburn is just able to expose it, and just hit enough through the air to Cam Coleman, enough deep balls to win the game. So I think Auburn's going to win. A&M's going to cover. The line is not cover, but I guess, it'll be by a close game is what I'm saying, less than a touchdown. So not a great, glowing discussion there for Aggieland. But if I'm wrong and A&M wins, then this is more proof that they have the right coach in Mike Elko. It's more proof that culture is flipped. It's more proof that the mental fortitude of this team, that the Tommy Moffitt effect is taking root, and that you can go off and win a big game and then go into a bye week and come back strong. And that is a sign of a mature team. That's the sign of a mentally strong team. It's the sign of a really good team. So I think that if A&M wins this game, especially if they look good defensively, that they're probably worthy, I'll say, at this time, of that top 10 ranking. Not that they aren't already, but it'll just be more cemented. Got a little chunk of games here. I'm going to kind of go rapid fire, I guess I'll say. I'm going to start with Ohio State at Washington. So the line on this game is 7.5. Ohio State's favored. It is on the road for them. Not a great spot for the Buckeyes, in my opinion. This is the first test since they've played Texas. And I think that Ohio State, like they typically are, is, they're good enough to sleepwalk through games against lesser opponents and then wake up for big games, right? The question that I have is, do they realize that this is a big game and that Washington is going to show out and that they're actually a pretty good football team? Because I think I don't think that there's anything in the future necessarily right now that's causing them to overlook it, but they just have to treat it like a big game because that's what it is. And Washington, that's how Washington treats it. So like I said, Ohio State, you can sleepwalk through games. This one you can't sleepwalk through. If you go in there, it's kind of a far trip. Obviously, going from Ohio to Washington, it's not close. So if you go in there and you think you can sleepwalk your way through this, I think you're going to be in for a rude awakening. I think you're going to get upset on the road because Washington's been a pretty efficient team. Damon Williams has had a good year so far, 778 through the air, 6 touchdowns, no interceptions, 76% completion. He's also had 34 carries for 220 yards and, 2 touchdowns. He's averaging 6.5 per carry whenever he runs. So he's a dynamic quarterback, better than Arch Manning, that's for sure. So I think, though, that Ohio State probably wins this game. Washington covers. But this is a test for that staff, too. It's a test for that, defensive staff. It's a test for the offense as well. Obviously, first road trip. It's, everything I hear, glowing reviews on that stadium that can get up. That it's, it's not a quiet place to play. It's not easy from everything that I've heard and read. So, going to be a good one there in Washington. We also have USC traveling to Illinois this week. USC is a 6.5-point favorite. I also think this is kind of a bad spot because of just the fact that Illinois got utterly embarrassed last week by Indiana. So unless Illinois is just that bad, I think that this is going to be kind of a gross game for USC. But USC, they do look to, they look like they're progressing by all accounts. Don't really believe in Illinois as much after that brutal loss, so I'm just going to stick with USC here. Take the, I guess you want to call it the easy route. That's what I'll take. I think USC is probably going to be, I probably would have picked them regardless of what that result was, but I feel more confident picking them now that, I saw that Indiana game. Speaking of which, Indiana plays at Iowa. This game, I hate to be the guy that keeps asking questions about Indiana, but, how legit are they? Obviously, credit to you. You got a good win last week, but can you not? You don't have to go out there and score 60 and just beat someone to death again. But how legit are you? How good can you be? How good is Iowa? I think if Indiana crushes them, I'll just have no more questions about them until they lose, frankly. So, but slowing down here for a second, Notre Dame goes to Arkansas this week. And I talked a little bit in the show earlier this week about how I was just stunned by the line. I'm less stunned now the more I think about it, but it seems pretty low. 4.5 is the line. Notre Dame is favored, but obviously it's on the road, so maybe I should relax there a little bit on that. But if Notre Dame really isn't good on defense, then this is going to be a volatile, high-scoring game. And because Arkansas is bad on defense. We know that. So if Notre Dame just can't contain the back end, if, Taylon Green is lighting them up, then I think this is going to be a pretty fun game to watch, but also a pretty, erratic game to watch. But regardless, it's a huge game for Notre Dame. Seems to be consistent, throughout. There seems to be consistent consensus. Good Lord. Just kind of out there that if another loss means that they probably missed the playoffs. And I would probably agree with that, although you still just have to be careful because you don't know how things are going to go yet elsewhere. We're still in September. So this game, it can deliver that loss for them, but I don't think it will. I think Notre Dame wins and covers. I just don't have faith, obviously, in Arkansas's defense. I have more faith in Notre Dame's, even though they could be terrible. I don't have faith in Arkansas to win these close competitive games because they've just time and time again shown that they just don't have that killer instinct. And frankly, that whole athletic department right now, whenever you talk about them in relation to the football program, is just kind of a joke, for lack of a better term. I mean, they just don't seem like they're taking it all that seriously. It seems like they're probably holding a lot back for their next coach because I think they know that at some point they're going to move on. And I think they know that Sam Pittman's not going to be there for, the long haul at this point. So I think any resources they have, they're obviously pushing that towards their other sports. They're pushing it towards basketball, pushing it towards baseball. The AD doesn't believe in him and he's got his own problems, but I think that any resources that they'd be willing to commit to football, they're holding back until they get the right coach in there, because I think it's pretty apparent to them that they don't have that right now. So it's a tough spot to be in as a fan of a university that's taking a sport like football, just that's not committing to it like they should. So they will one day soon, I'm sure, but right now, they're not there yet. And even once they decide to commit that, it's going to take some time for it to kind of come to fruition. So, But until further notice, these kinds of games, I just am not going to be picking Arkansas. I do, however, want to acknowledge that it is possible that they bite them. And, so don't overlook that. But speaking of games that won't get overlooked, LSU, with Weeks, Ole Miss, Landry Kiffin, apparently they're in a nice little relationship. Lane Kiffin says take the over in this game, if you saw that, by the way, which I did promptly take the over when I saw that, because what's the worst that could happen, right? I am doubtful of LSU's defense, specifically the secondary, and I'm doubtful of their offense, specifically the run game. I think that this is the game that those potential issues that LSU has shown that they have can cost them a win. I don't think that Florida was equipped. Well, let me restate that. I know Florida wasn't equipped offensively to exploit any flaws in the LSU defense. Looking back now, it's obvious Clemson was not able to, they were not equipped to exploit any flaws in the LSU defense. I think Ole Miss is. I think that secondary for LSU is, I think there's some potential here for them to get embarrassed. Not a crazy amount. I just think that, if they're a weakness, if there's flaws there, I think Ole Miss is the first team that they'll play that's equipped to exploit it. And I don't think that LSU's run game is just going to magically answer the call here, because they have yet again, this is another year of subpar, ability to run the football. And while Garrett Nussmeier is a talented quarterback, he's still shown the trait of, how could I put this lightly? He's still shown that he has the ability to be cataclysmic in his decision making and cause, throw interceptions, egregious picks, just not make good decisions at times. While overall he's a really good quarterback, he still has that flaw. They just need offensive balance. They can't go out there and ask Nussmeier to throw the ball 50 times a game, because I think he's going to make some mistakes that the defense can't stop the other team from capitalizing on. And I think that Lane Kiffin, I just get the sense that he wants this game bad. And, I think that he's going to get it. So I'm going to say that Ole Miss wins this game. They are like a 1.5 point favorite. But I think defensively, Ole Miss could make LSU one-dimensional fairly easy and just force LSU to press. And I think they're going to press too hard, and I think it's going to cost them a football game. So will that be an upset? Should you consider it to be an upset? I don't know. Let's find out. All right, teams on upset alert. Florida State, they're a 6.5 point favorite at Virginia. This is a 7.5 on a scale of 1 to 10. Notre Dame, 4.5 at Arkansas. That's a 5, because while I think obviously the upset would be the talk of college football probably for, that evening, the next day, I still don't really think it's going to happen, but I think the potential is definitely there. So it's a 5. Ohio State, 7.5 at Washington. This is an 8 on the upset alert meter. LSU at Ole Miss. Ole Miss is favored by 1.5 points. I think that Ole Miss upsetting LSU, even though Ole Miss is favored and ranked highly, I think that this would be looked at as an upset, because I think that LSU fans and LSU coaches think that they have an elite team, and this would be a mark against that. So I do have it as a 5, just because it's not technically an upset, but I think that it would kind of be treated as an upset. Tennessee, 7.5 at Mississippi State. This is a 7. I think that the potential for Mississippi State to obviously be better than they were expected is already proven to be, true. So how far can they go is the only question now. And last but not least, Kentucky is playing at South Carolina. South Carolina is favored at home by 5.5. This is a 9. Kentucky is a bad team in the win-loss column by the end of the year, but they're good enough to beat and just drag teams down into the mud and beat them. And it happened last year. It's going to happen this year. It almost did against Ole Miss. I just kind of think that I would not be surprised if we look over, in the middle of the night Saturday and see that Kentucky's just dragging South Carolina through the mud. Not necessarily meaning, 40-10 type of score, but just ugly, brutal game. So thank you for listening to this latest episode of the College Football Podcast. Appreciate anyone who does enjoy the show and listen. Make sure you follow me on Twitter at Campus Pigskin. Sub to the YouTube channel. Follow the podcast feed. It's a sleepy Friday around here for me. Still working though, so love doing these podcasts on the old lunch break. But regardless, thanks for listening. Until next time, I will be back. I don't know what day exactly. I'm going to try to do a reaction on Saturday night. Maybe have that uploaded quick. This is just a huge weekend, and it's going to be a lot of focus, a lot of energy coming into this Saturday. So going to need it. Starts tonight with Florida State. We also have TCU going to Arizona State. So regardless, appreciate you.